Hi, welcome to Wannik Science. This ecology video is on population growth. In this case, we're thinking about populations. We have to define what is a population. A population, of course, is a group of individuals of the same type or the same species living in the same area. So if you're looking at the diagram, you'll notice that the population is the second most specific group we can be focused on in ecology. So when we think about a population, we could be looking at the whole population of an entire species worldwide. Or we can define our area to be a much smaller space. We could think of all the squirrels in your backyard or all the high school students in the city. The population needs to be defined in terms of its area and, of course, the species we're thinking about. But when we think about populations, really the main concern is population growth or change. And to best picture that, we're going to think of it in terms of a graph. The first part of the graph is going to be population size on the y-axis, and the x-axis is going to be time, which is usually measured in years or generations, depending on what organism we're focused on. Well, the first type of growth that we will see, the first model for growth, is going to be referred to as exponential growth. And if you know what the word exponential means, you might recognize that as an apt name. Looking at this growth, you can see that it grows very quickly, and essentially it seems to be doubling or even tripling every year or every reproduction cycle. This is a very rapid reproduction growth rate for a population. The second growth model is one referred to as logistic growth, where the population grows, and it might even be growing quickly, but it soon finds that it is slowing down and finally reaches some kind of long-term sustainable pattern called a carrying capacity. And it's essentially the maximum number of individuals that this ecosystem can support. That's called carrying capacity. So if you're looking at these two growth models, I'm hoping in your mind you're doing a quick compare and contrast. Exponential growth grows quickly, logistic growth eventually slows down and reaches some sustainable carrying capacity. Well, what is the consequences of an exponential growth, the red line? Well, as the population continues to increase and increase, at some point the resources available to that ecosystem or available in that ecosystem to the population are going to get depleted and diminished. So the population at some point will end up resulting in some major crash and possibly even the entire population dying off. Whereas logistic growth, we see the population is increasing in its population size, but starts to taper off and slow down in its growth rate until it reaches carrying capacity. This idea that we have a long-term sustainable population that's living within the confines of what the ecosystem can support. Well, what would actually cause a population to slow down like that? If given infinite resources and unlimited resources, all populations would reach exponential growth. So what are the factors that might slow a population down into logistic growth? Well, those are referred to as limiting factors. These are the things that are going to push a population, direct a population to it to slow down and eventually stop growing and reach some kind of carrying capacity. So what might those look like? Well, they tend to be resource dependent. We're going to think of them in terms of density independent and density dependent factors. In this case, let's think about density dependent. Why would a population slow down in its growth rate? Well, the first one actually is easiest to think about in terms of competition. If the resources are becoming limited, then individuals within the population are going to be competing for the same resources. These might be things like food or water, maybe there's shelter, adequate nesting grounds, maybe it's competition for mates. All of these things would slow a population's growth down because individuals now have to compete for resources, and many of them won't be able to compete. So the population slows down because many are simply dying off or unable to reproduce and contribute to the population. The second one is predation, where predators now are attracted to dense areas where there are lots of individuals. It just makes sense. If you're a wolf, you're going to find a pack where you're going to find a herd where there's a lot of individuals. It gives you choices, maybe easier prey to hunt down. The last one, of course, is similar to predation, where it's parasitism and disease. This is where highly populated, dense areas of individuals pass along diseases very easily and particularly rapidly. For example, you might find in a daycare, if one child shows up to a daycare situation or a classroom situation where they're sick, you might find by the end of the week a large number of individuals are sick. You see that in dense populations in the wild as well. Even things like cultivated areas where rows of corn would be highly densely planted, you'd see a lot of disease. If it starts on one side of the field, could very quickly move through the field. These are density dependent. They're depending on how closely populated this area is and how densely populated it is. In contrast to density-dependent population limiting factors, we see density-independent, those that seem to not matter in regards to the size of the population. These are things that would reduce a population even if it was sparsely populated. For example, a drought or climate extremes, things like a flood or a landslide, these are things that would affect a population regardless of how many individuals are there. Volcanoes, tsunamis, these are things that, again, have big impacts on a population regardless of how many individuals live in that space. The second one, of course, is related to that, and that's human disturbances. If a human comes in and deforests an entire area, it doesn't matter how many individual organisms live there, the population will be drastically affected, even if it's not densely populated. So now in this reflection, I'd like you to respond to this in your notebook. Consider a situation where a few deer have swam to a nearby island to get away from predators. This actually happened in Lake Michigan. So after several years, what was a few deer became a population greater than 2,000. And although the island had excellent resources to begin with, the population was reaching some kind of food supply limit. So based on that prompt, consider, is this population experiencing an exponential or logistic growth model? So label it and then give a quick sketch of what that population change would look like. And then, of course, number 2, I want you to propose and then explain your proposed 3 limiting factors that would redirect the deer population to a more sustainable carrying capacity. Be thoughtful about this. So read the prompt again and respond to that in your notebooks.